Besides, their catechism does not hide the fact that their philosophy is a synthesis of the Buddhist, Confucianist, and Taoist religions. But here it was suddenly that the chief drew strange movements in space with his right arm. All fell silent as if by magic. X whispered in my ear that the spirits were going to make a communication through Mr. Ao Cook. In fact, the latter, having seized a big pencil which had been placed beforehand on a small table with some paper, set to transcribe the divine words, his eyes closed. They explained to me that he was the preferred medium of great spirits, venerated by the faithful, which the Bodhisattva Panam had dedicated to me through the chief of the group. I was, in fact, very proud to learn that during my former existences I had accomplished great works, and I was exiled in this valley of tears only to atone for the crime of pride of which I was guilty. I should have been an unbearably proud man in the course of my successive existences. This, my friends, believe in mediumnity, which is to say, in communications with the beyond, and consequently in the survival of the soul. Differing from the Catholics, they do not speak of eternal hell, but about transmigration of the soul, which, by leaving the physical body, may live in other earths than ours. In this they resemble the Buddhists, with, however, this important restriction, whereas Shakyamuni's disciples admit that a human soul may come back to earth and live in the body of a beast. Min Li's followers, more modern, reject this hypothesis. In their new faith, the law of attraction replaces in very unexpected fashion the Buddhist transmigration of the soul. It is unnecessary then to have the wicked come back to this earthly life in the skin of a pig or a dog to atone for past faults. This would be, moreover, presenting the author of creation as too cruel a judge. No, the law of attraction that plays a space suffices for celestial justice. Such who through a life of sacrifices should be deified after death, thanks to the attraction, arrive at a superior world in space. On the contrary, the wicked, the selfish, shall fall themselves, after their departure from the earth, into a planet whose conditions of existence are still more painful. All this is done naturally, automatically, as it were. Though these latter lines are not very clear, or are disputable from a Latin spiritualistic point of view, the Anglo-Saxon Spiritism does not admit of a return to the earth, but of progress in spheres of space. Let us come to the utility of Caodaism. Nevertheless, with the triumph of capitalism, the old Cochin Chinese patriarchal economic structure was broken down. The Gialong Code, which recognized only the collective personality of the village and the family, thoroughly anti-individualistic, was abolished, or almost so, in Cochin China, where the individual freedom, recognized more or less by the modified codes, is the cause of the discard of Confucianism. After all, the latter really constituted a religion with its canon, its clergy, its temples, and not just a morality. It is clear that under these conditions, a father's authority, as well as that of a husband or a landowner, could be more threatened in Cochin China than in other parts of Vietnam, where the Gialong Code and Confucianism still retain their power. That is, in my opinion, the only reason why there was room in our 20 Cochin Chinese provinces for the birth of the new faith. If the Shakyamuni doctrine can be subdivided into two great schools, that of the greater vehicle, also called Northern, which comprises in Indochina the Vietnamese Buddhist population, and that of the lesser vehicle, or Southern, which influences Cambodia and Laos, why should it not be able to take upon itself the modern form of Caodaism? We pass by all that is connected with the persecutions in this pamphlet. Concerning the future of Caodaism, 2 remarks. 1. Whatever one may say about Confucianism, it was the national religion of China and Vietnam. In these countries, the spiritual and temporal powers are joined in one man's hand, the emperor's, the Son of Heaven, consequently, master of soul and body of his subjects. To have religion, there must be temples of worship or churches, a canon, a clergy. These conditions have been met by the Nhau doctrine. The temple of worship, is it the paternal house itself? While the 4 classics and the 5 canons sum up the catechism of the saint of the land of Lo, Confucius, the clergy was a society of men of letters who, in fact, held both powers, spiritual and temporal, with, as a kind of pope, the emperor, the Son of Heaven. The development of capitalism in Cochin China, with its consequent abrogation of the Jialong Code, an abrogation that favors individualism to the detriment of Confucian collectivism, undermined favorable conditions to the survival of the religion of the sages. It is thus, historically, that the dawn of new religious sects, and particularly of Caodaism, must be explained. It is characteristic in our century of international capitalism. This religious reform of ours is contemporary with an Asiatic movement of the same essence, the same historic mission. For, in Japan and China, the tormented elements of the feudal bourgeoisie seek to create a social superstructure by founding 1,001 modern neo-Buddhist sects. The Caodaists and the Minhalists of our century profit by comparing their doctrines with those of the Japanese and the Chinese reforms. I add that the Min League was but a new sect among many other sects that grew like mushrooms, but it represented the sect the most disciplined, the most educated from a philosophical point of view, and which possessed a theory wholly expressed in its catechism. Caodaism, literally religion of the high throne, the founder of which was the late Lê Văn Trung, quickly made contact with Minhalism to borrow its theory, its worship, its ritual organization. But while Mr. Ao Cook's proud school tends only to form an elite, Caodaism addresses itself to the masses. Thus, it represents the characteristic features of a religious organization of the mass. The diversity and multiplicity of new religious schools which have appeared in Cochin China since 1926 are characteristic of our epoch of free and intensive thinking. We do not count the sects anymore. Let us mention only the most important ones: Min Li, Min Tian, Min Tan, Cao Đài. The latter is subdivided into orthodox and unorthodox schools. Besides, the churches of the Reformed Buddhism, which have some right to pretend to the dignity of a philosophy, we notice the birth of sects with strange practices. These are, no doubt, Chinese romantic reminders. Thus we have seen General Nguyen Van Dien with his disciples in open battle with the orthodox religion of TIionPen. Questioned by the authorities regarding the attempted violation of the Caodaist Holy Land, all refused to talk. Also curious is the Nguyen Kim Mun school, which does not fear to express in scarcely veiled terms beliefs related to Mohammedan sensualism. All the sects of which we speak above were born almost simultaneously. All, without exception, claim to be a reform of Buddhism, judged to be out of date. Surprisingly, Cochin China, alone of all the countries in the Union, took the initiative in this kind of religious reform, which furthermore participates in, perhaps without knowing it, the widest and most general movement that includes China and Japan. In fact, in those countries, and particularly in the land of the rising sun, we notice the beginning of 1,001 neo-Buddhist sects that practice Spiritism. Professor Chamberlain has exposed to the European public the various philosophies of the Japanese religious movement. Caodaism, by its originally spiritualistic character, is confused with certain new religious tendencies of China and Japan of an occultist character. We have before our eyes documents which admit of no doubt. China, for many centuries, has known spiritualistic seances, worship of spirits and practices of sorcery. The Dalai Lama spoke in a German dialect toward the religious renaissance in Japan. Astral projection, automatic writing, dematerialization. The Baron of Mech proves that it is in China people experiment the best mediums. Pearl Buck declares that the Orient and the Occident must combine. The Massacre of Animals. A German scientific expedition in China and Siam. The Festival of LÆCH. The survival of the past among the Japanese. The Kutsu, or the Japanese art of restoring the dead to life. Spiritism in China, they resuscitate the dead. The Shinto. Confucius, Lao-Tzu, and the afterlife. Buddhism in North India and Burma, etc., etc. But opposition between the European spirit and the Asiatic religious conceptions often break out. In the Nouvelle Revue, we can read the confusion of it in the book Buddhism by Entai Tamamatsu. In presenting the book Buddhism of his friend Entai Tamamatsu, the translator, Mr. Q. Matsu, himself the author of the Japanese Buddhist sects, as well as numerous works of philosophy and delicate translations. Mr. Matsu writes, "This book is not the scholarly work of a specialist, but merely a work intended for modern men and skeptical intellectuals." In spite of the simplicity with which the doctrine of Buddhism is exposed, it does not seem to us that this work, and especially the philosophy, which he attempts to bring within the scope of the average intelligence, can deeply penetrate the European masses. The principle of the non-self and that of causality was conceived by the Buddhists being found, the Occidental mentality, too much in opposition to the conception of the majority, that will always prefer to cast upon the entity, under the name of destiny, the responsibility of their sufferings, rather than acknowledge the natural harvest of grain sown. That which in Mr. Entai Tamatsu's work seemed able to retain our attention most particularly is, besides Buddhist psychology, to which the author restores his profoundly human sense, the statement of the attempt made by certain Japanese intellectuals to bring Buddhism back to its original nobility, by freeing it from the conceptions of certain interested sects, which, for believers, prayer, meditation with crossed legs, and especially offerings, constitute the essential. That movement, to which we cannot help giving all our sympathy, and which relies on the fact that Buddha, since his Satori, illumination, always attached more punyas, merits, to the social act than to the most earnest prayer, the most severe mortification, that movement, even if it must remain purely Asiatic, is yet worthy to be known by us. For, permitting the adaptation of Buddhism to the practical life, it could be very heavy with consequences in the whole world. And if we consider that no text exists facilitating the knowledge of Buddhism, we must thank Mr. Entai Tamatsu and his faithful translator for having given us that work by way of introduction to the study of a philosophy able, so says the author, to penetrate not only into an epoch, but all epochs. The opposition breaks out still more brutally in such an echo as this, The Secrets of the Mahatmas in Brazil. While the Bulletin des Amitiés Spirituelles sets itself to depreciate the faith of the superhumans and to reduce them to proud little Luciferina, compartmented in a corner of the created, and wishing to dethrone God, O Pensamento, St. Paul's great initiatic review, passes in review the faculties developed by those initiates despised by Severe and his Christic sect. 1. Possibility of entering into relations with the planetary beings of the solar system. 2. Our cosmos has no more secrets for them because of their internal vision. 3. knowledge of the future. 4. Possibilities of acting on matter. 5. Transmission of sound to great distance. 6. Limited influence upon the actions of other men. 7. Reading of others' thoughts. 8. Spontaneous understanding of all languages. 9. Possibility of prolongation of the physical life. Elixir of a long life. 10. Healing of sick persons. 11. Power of duplication, etc. For despicable little initiates confined in a small corner of the created, that is not so bad. But what is painful, with which people play, is to oppose these possible faculties of the Mahatmas to Christ's virtues, to denounce them as incompatible, in order to succeed by cultivated ignorance, to maintain the party spirit, instead of opening their arms to all men, without category or distinction. Though some be not ready for that universal embrace, we see that by limitation, being prejudiced, they try to impose it upon others. O. Astro has estimated that in 1926 there still were in Japan 71,281 Buddhist temples, frequented by 58,621,000 inhabitants. Where is Christianity in the Nippon archipelago? According to LİCH del Porvenir, which borrows the details from the great spiritualistic association, Moto Internacional in Esperanto, we believe now dissolved, and its leaders hunted down and incarcerated. 60 years of evangelization by missionaries have succeeded in converting only 250,000 Japanese. Stable figure in spite of the enormous increase in population these last years. At the same time, new sects and religions with a Buddhist and Shintoist basis draw to themselves thousands and thousands of new believers. Komoto, for instance, counts more believers than Christianity. A man to all men must say, Li Taipei was for China what Homer was for Greece, and Asian for Scotland. Quan Tan de Quan was for China what Turenne was for France. Buddha, Lao-Tzu, Confucius were what they are and thee. Thou art a son of God, as I am thy brother. Thy suffering is my suffering. Let my joy in being a son of God be thy joy in being my brother. Buddha, Lao-Tzu, Confucius were what they are and thou, and I, are sons of God. So as for thee, thou art I, and I am thee. If thou understandest that, afterwards thou shalt understand peace, harmony, and the joy of being. Caodaist Ritual. The Holy See of Tainan gathered in a pamphlet various pages of the Revue Caodaist and published in 1936 under the title Caodaism or Reformed Buddhism, Third Amnesty of the God in the Orient, with these words of introduction. The pages you are going to read are extracted from the Revue Caodaist, published at Saigon. We have been very careful to gather, classify, and coordinate them into a small pamphlet that shall present to the reader a summary statement of the scheme and the doctrine of Caodaism, or Reformed Buddhism. May these modest selections help the seeker after truth to have an exact idea about the Caodaist ideal in its principal traits. The Caodaist Sacerdocy. We can perhaps notice already that prayer constitutes the most important part in the Caodaist worship. Here is how the Caodaist dignitaries justify it. We are reproached for being uselessly absorbed in long prayers, taking much time for this obligation, which might better be employed otherwise. We should willingly acknowledge the contingency of the grounds for this reproach if the prayers we practice consisted in a monotonous recital of intelligible words from which the thoughts of the heart were excluded. But practiced with intelligence and earnestness, energetic and full of function. A prayer, an act of faith, is not only an act of worship, but also an elevation of the heart, a spring of the soul toward the Supreme Being. In the existing state of their religious evolution, the mass of the Caodaist faithful need to acquire a will, such as will permit them to resist material temptations under all circumstances, and to surround themselves with pure atmosphere which wards off bad ideas and inferior influences of space. That will, to be efficacious, must be sustained by faith. Now the repeated practice of prayer strengthens that so precious faith, at the same time attracting, by the purity of the heart, the protecting forces of the beyond. Further, there is nothing more ravishing, more sublime than examining one's conscience, forgetting every day, by hours of fervent prayer, business in the world, to lift one's thoughts toward God, with which one deals face to face. Such is the aim of a prayer that must be daily practiced by the simple faithful. Tomorrow, raised to a superior degree of evolution, they shall know how to bring it back to its abstract interior form, meditation. From an invocatory point of view, we pray for sick, unhappy persons, for which we beg God, not the enjoyment of a material good, of a personal interest, but the prompt return to health, or the favor of an occult moral support, empowering them to undergo, without weakness, a trial or a karmic consequence. We also pray for the suffering, unhappy spirits, for whom we invoke divine mercy. Thus performed, prayer constitutes one of the necessary practices for the salvation of souls. They who have some religious experience, who speak about religious things not from the outside, as one curiosity that is well worth another, the point of view of Parisian journalists in general, but from the inside, shall we recognize a great wisdom in these simple lines. The Caodaist Symbolism. From the same pamphlet, we quote these passages. From the consciousness that man has duties toward God that created him, is born the feeling of adoration. The whole of the acts by which we witness to God, that feeling of adoration constitutes what we call worship. This is true of Caodaist worship. This is practiced every day in temples as in private homes, in 4 sessions, at 6 o'clock a.m., at noon, at 6 o'clock p.m., then at midnight. Prostrated before the divine altar, in the leap of the soul toward the Supreme Being, we begin with the rite of the offering of incense. Then comes that of the opening of prayers. Those prayers once said, we set ourselves to sing in chorus a song to the glory of God, then 3 others in honor of the 3 saints. Such is, in all its simplicity, the rite of daily worship. As for the divine worship celebrated in temples on the days of great ceremony, there is a more imposing ceremonial. The dignitaries of the male sex, in their costume of ceremony, the color of which is determined by the branch to which they belong, prostrate themselves in transversal rows on the mat spread before the divine altar which they face. On their right and before the altar of Dít N.ĐèO kneel on another mat the followers of the same sex, all dressed in white, with the traditional black turban on their heads. On the left and facing the altar of Dít, prostrated in the same manner as their fellow worshippers, on the right, are the women, also dressed in white. As for dignitaries, they are distinguished from the simple believers by their special costume. Prayers are everywhere the same, but here they are set to music and recited according to command given by the masters of ceremony. The Caodaist worship, besides constituting an act of adoration, contains a symbolism which in brief we will explain to our readers. The disposition of the altar, such as described by Mr. G. Collier, is but the symbol of the fusion in unity of 5 branches of the Great Way. But the objects of worship, the offerings, etc., bear a secret seal, a symbolic meaning. The objects of worship. In the middle of the altar is constantly kept lit a lamp with spherical glass, symbolizing the universal monad. In the beginning of the ages, the universe, we think, was constituted by the monad, who is the universal soul, the non-manifested form of God. By his manifestations, the monad successively presented his two aspects, male and female, represented on the altar by two kindled fires. Offerings. The offerings of flowers, alcohol, and tea respectively symbolize the three constitutive elements of the human being, the tin, the kai, and the tan. The tin, as its name shows, is the essence of all matter, the cosmic sperm, without which no light may be manifested. It is the sexual energy of man and animal, the germinative virtue of plant. By its evaporation, the tin, which resides in man, constitutes the coarse part of the perspirit. It is to the perspiritual body as the flesh is to the physical body. The ki, which literally means breath, air, is in man, health, strength, vital energy. It is in the perspirit the agent that unites the soul with the physical body, which it vivifies. The tan, intelligent principle, is double in the human being. The superior mental is the divine spirit in man. The inferior mental is the most subtle part of the spirit. To convert sexual energy into vital energy into mental energy, such is the processes of the mystical purification of the three constitutive elements of the human being. As for the sticks of incense we burn at each ceremony, there are invariably 5. Now this symbolic number represents the 5 degrees of initiation. 1. Ye-hun, purity. 2. Din-hun, meditation. 3. Hui-hun, wisdom. 4. TRIionT, superior knowledge. 5. Deit-N.ĐèO, karmic liberation. To be admitted to the threshold of initiation, the first condition for the worshipper is purity in all its form, purity of body, action, language, and thought. Once the threshold is crossed, he sets himself to meditation. By this spiritual exercise, the believer whose thoughts and sensations stand aloof from the world of sense lifts his soul toward the superior self, with which he is put into close contact. In the tete-a-tete of this inner withdrawal, carried the completest possible abstraction, where the human soul seeks to identify itself with the universal soul, truths shine little by little into the worshipper's spirit, no longer allured by the illusory appearances of anything in the world. The highest degree of ascension he feels in his being the full awakening of the superior knowledge that permits him to perceive all eternal truths and embrace, without the least effort, the whole of the past and the future. In this state of supreme wisdom, he can contemplate without being dazzled the divine light, a light that purifies, illumines, and beautifies. Before him, the way of salvation is now open, the karmic liberation. From that symbolism, as simple as powerful, emanates the great constructive and universal lesson of the human brotherhood. It is important for the good of bruised and suffering humanity that every people forget its personal interest to think, but of those of the whole, that they forgive one another in all manifestations of thought and faith, that they show at last to one another the broadest tolerance. You may object that in the actual state of human mentality, more prone to egoism than altruism, talking about universal fraternity is equivalent to dreaming of utopia. This objection is unfortunately plausible, and shall remain such, so long as man shall be conceived as a body rather than a spirit. For, said Annie Besant, matter grows by taking round it, constantly adopting what is exterior to it, and incorporating it into what it already possesses. Material things are worn out and finally perish in the use, and as their quantity is limited, they who desire to possess it are numerous. Struggles spring up between these latter. Earning, possession are in effect the conditions of material success. But when man begins to conceive himself as a spirit rather than a body, he understands that dividing and giving are the conditions of growth and power. Spiritual riches increase in fact in the use. They never perish. When they are given, they are multiplied. When they are divided, their possession, their assimilation, but become more complete. Brotherhood must come from the spirit and be spread outside, through domains of intellect and emotion, to finally affirm themselves in the material world. It shall never be established by law imposed from outside. It must triumph by the spirit overflowing from within. One day, the petty king, Kung of Zhou's principality, lost a hunting crossbow. His officers were ready to go and seek it, but Kung prevented them, saying, "What is the use of fetching it? Bear in mind that we don't lose anything when a crossbow mislaid by an inhabitant of Zhou is soon found again by another inhabitant of the same principality." Confucius, having heard those words, commented, "What a regrettable limitation of Kung Vung's feeling of fraternity! Would he not better have said, 'A man lost a crossbow, another man shall find it'?" So expressed, the concept of human fraternity by the great Chinese philosopher appears more beautiful, more striking, more concise. On this splendid plane of human fraternity, Christ's disciples and Haran's sons, the followers of Buddha, Confucius, LİCH, and enthusiasts of theosophy, spiritism, and occultism, find themselves united in their common desire to build the temple of humanity. Let us help with all our might this fraternal union, this constructive cooperation, that we no longer need blush for the crimes and atrocities with which we have till now bloodied so many centuries of history. It is time, past time, to redeem so much of barbarity. Let us pray, meditate, become living temples. To reach summits after trials, a Caodaist disposes of the cell of meditation. The cell of meditation is a place where faithful are admitted to receive initiation. Every believer who asks to be admitted there must conform to the following rules. Article 1. He must have fulfilled his moral duties and an exclusively vegetarian diet for more than 6 months. Article 2. He must be presented by a member more virtuous than he. Article 3. All written communication with the outside shall be forbidden to him, except with his parents, on condition that it be read beforehand by the superior of the institution. Article 4. He must refuse access to the establishment to all strangers to the religion, though they be officials or members of his own family. Article 5. He is forbidden to converse with persons from outside. However, he may receive the call of his parents or children with the superior's authorization. Article 6. He must abstain himself from chewing betel, smoking tobacco, and eating anything besides meals served by the institution. Article 7. He must have a calm spirit, a quiet conscience. He must live on good terms with his cellmates and avoid loud conversation. He must help them in religious practice. Article 8. He must obey all injunctions of the superior and practice spiritual exercises following the schedule of prescriptions fixed by the latter. How many Occidentals give themselves up to prayer? I mean a free and spontaneous prayer. How many Occidentals give themselves up to meditation? Yes, I repeat, in spiritual matter, we Occidentals are illiterates. Even if the great architect of the universe was but an illusion, a lure, a word, a prayer should be useful, meditation should be useful. In our crass, in our anti-religious frenzy, we have banished both from our daily practices. from our spiritual exercises of every day. But here perhaps a new science, cosmobiology, with its great poet, Theo Barlet, brings us back softly, not to frighten us. Strong spirits are gentle people who do not like to be cheated. Counsels to a Caodaist of Europe. Reformed Buddhism is broad tolerance. It is the junction of all ways followed till now, by people who would move toward the divine. You are going to cry what we are pretentious. Must we not suffer in imitation of the Savior, while doing a little good around us? Vegetarian diet. We may begin by observing 10 monthly days. We abandon the flesh diet because we would shun to bring suffering to beings that, though less evolved than we, yet know how to suffer as we. Medically speaking, man, because of his constitution, is not created to feed on flesh, which his digestive organ ill supports. Besides, animals are ill as we. It is difficult to perceive it, and men feed on sick parts. Man's sickness added to the animals creates others, the nature of which medical science still is impotent to discover, still more impotent to heal. The vegetarian diet generally brings a sweetness to man, always sound in body and spirit. Since it is a matter of habit, we only ask new adherents for 6 days per month. Altar. Yes, you ought to have an altar. All you said in your letter is the exact truth. You must always share in the divine communion of ideas to the full, and the altar is there to remind you. A common prayer at a fixed time really puts the spirit of every one of us in the community of thought, and gives a reflex in the divine astral that our Master, God, leads. Did not Christ say that where 2 of you shall agree in prayer, your plea shall be heard? We then may put ourselves in spirit under the eternal paternity of God. The European, more than the Asiatic, must always have an altar in his house. In fact, he must work more than an Asiatic, for life is more difficult, and he must struggle from morning to evening for his daily bread. And his altar is there to remind him of his duties toward his Creator when he comes home. We must avoid numerous rites that smell of charlatanism or heresy, but we must not radically do away with them. Intellectuals and scholars are generally brought to extremes. They are either atheists or believers to the point of intolerance, not to say fanaticism. Let us be of the golden mean, as the sage Confucius recommends. In case of death, gather as many as possible of our Caodaist brethren for common prayers. These prayers are intended to facilitate the disincarnation of the dead, and by the force of concentrated thoughts, we lift the spirit of the dead toward superior planes which he alone cannot reach by his own efforts. As for you, think of living long enough to propagate the new faith, to the glory of our Divine Master. For us who know the death here below is but the resurrection in the beyond. Death does not make us afraid. It is to us, on the contrary, a deliverance. Yet, while we still may do a little material and moral good around us, we still must live long enough to fulfill the mission incumbent upon us. We only may progress and approach divinity by a moral perfection of the soul, which is manifested by acts of charity and love. These are the only that empower us to enter into God's appanage. Dignitaries. God's universal government consists of 2 distinct branches. The one is a government of souls and beings, and the other, instruction and education. Most founders of religions belong only to the second branch of instructors. They are great legislators of God in this world. As God does not desire that, on earth, one man should hold all divine power, he divides it into 2, and commits it to 2 highest dignitaries. 1. The Gao Tong holds the power and is the chief of Chung Dai, Q 9, Chung Plains, Dai Palace. 9 degrees of the angelic or divine hierarchy, in symbol of 9 divine planes. 2. The whole FAP is in charge of religious justice and looks after the application of law, and is the chief of Dít N.ĐèO, place of meeting between God and humanity. Dít union, T God, God united with men, or men united with God. 1. The former is attended by dignitaries enumerated in the pamphlet Le Caodaism ou Buddhism Rénové, pages 35, and next in the chapter Notre Code Religieux. The dignitaries of the Confucianist branch wear a purple gown which signifies authority. Those of the Buddhist branch wear a saffron yellow gown, symbol of virtue. Those of the Taoist branch dresses in azure, symbol of tolerance or pacifism. Only the Gai Tung and the Chung Fap of the Taoist branch dress in white. Lady dignitaries also dress in white. Dignitaries of the same grade, either Confucianists or Taoists or Buddhists, have the same attributes, which are defined in the above-mentioned religious code. They are distinguished only by the color of their costume. When one of them is alone in a parish, he is the chief there, must see to everything and know everything. But when there are many in the same parish, the superior of that parish may entrust them with the following works, based on their aptitudes, knowledges, or on the branches to which they belong. The Reds, Confucianists, may take charge of personnel, rights, and order. The Blues, Taoists, take care of the interior organization, office works, instruction, education of the faithful, and charitable institutions. The Yellows, Buddhists, see to finances, building, works, and various exchanges. 2. The whole FAP is attended by the 2 following collaborators: the Tung Fan, who leads souls towards nirvana; the Tung San, who looks after men and brings them toward the Tao, the way, and the truth. Each of these 3 great dignitaries has 4 immediate collaborators of the following branches. A little detailed explanation. The FAP branch, mysticism, has a chief, the whole FAP, who manages the Bao FAP, protector of established laws, mystic side. Hien FAP, he who seeks the beautiful, the good, for improving of what exists. The Kai FAP, propagator. The Tip FAP, he who helps in the application of laws and receives all complaints or suggestions. The Tao branch, religious life, has as a chief the Tung Fan, who looks after the Bai Tao, Hien Tao, Qin Tao, Tien Tao, same prerogatives as above, but in their branch. The Te branch, social life, has as a chief the Tung San, who sees to the Bao Te, Hien Te, Kai Te, Tip Te, same prerogatives as above, but in their branch. These 15 dignitaries form a council having the right of jurisdiction and control. They communicate with God in spirits as mediums. They are seconded by a body of 12 academicians, only some of which have been named. To accede to these grades, one must begin by being Archivist Secretary, then Registrar, Commissar of Justice, Lawyer, Inspector, Chancellor, and Instructor. When an instructor has converted a nation, he may, according to vacancies, successively accede to one of the grades, Tip, then Kai, afterwards Hien, next Bao, and to one of the 3 above-mentioned highest dignitaries. According also to his previous acquisitions, he shall be in one of the 3 branches, Fap, Tao, or Te. The high dignitaries of Dit N.ĐèO are charged with the instruction and education of humanity, religious justice, and control of the acts of those of Cao, without, however, being able to interfere themselves in the government and administration of the sacerdocy. They are legislators. They also have a mission to propagate the new faith by every means, press, meetings, etc., and to take care of the improvement and progress of letters, arts, and everything that shall serve to help humanity to live with less suffering and in moral well-being. I am of the Taoist branch, as are a great number of dignitaries of the foreign missions, who are spirits of Bac Ban Nong, of the White Lodge, presently reincarnated to work for the success of the third amnesty of God in the Orient. The aura of each of us, according to the divine plane to which he belongs, has a particular coloration: blue, yellow, red, or serene white. The branch of each of us may be revealed only by guide spirits or our divine master, from our entry as members of the Sacerdotism. That is to say, as dignitaries beginning with lay san, student priest. Hymns. As for hymns, we have them only in Vietnamese. There are prayers that date back to 1,200 years ago, which Han Sun Tu Lamas at Ko Tu Pan obtained in Spiritist seances. Their translation is impossible to us at present. We shall